Hi, my name is Noah Davis and I am a Year 11 student at St Philip's Christian College, Port Stephens. Today, I wish to honour and acknowledge the sacrifice of the Australian soldiers in World War I. To do this, I would like to tell a brief story of my great-grandfather, Thomas Lyle Davis, who at the age I currently am, left Australia to go fight in one of the most horrific wars the world has ever seen. Through the process of researching this project, I am humbled that at our same age, whilst I spend my youth surfing, studying and being with friends, my great-grandfather was at Gallipoli and on the Western Front fighting for our country. Australia's involvement in the First World War began when Britain and Germany went to war on the 4th of August 1914, and both Prime Minister Joseph Cook and opposition leader Andrew Fisher, who were in the midst of an election campaign, pledged full support for Britain. The outbreak of war was greeted in Australia, as in many other places, with great enthusiasm. Thomas Lyle Davis, my great-grandfather, was born on the 17th of July 1899. By the time the First World War rolled around, he was too young and, like many others, lied about his age. Thomas was accepted entering the war at the age of 16, a part of the 5th Brigade of the 18th Battalion, Australian Imperial Forces. Thomas was a part of the 5th Reinforcements, which departed Sydney on the 5th of October 1915, on board the HMAT Themistocles. With their orders in, they were bound for Gallipoli to reinforce the men already there. The early August assaults on Lone Pine and the Neck had taken their toll, and the powers still believed a breakthrough was possible. The first reinforcements of the 18th Battalion arrived at Gallipoli as fresh-faced troops eager for battle. 2 days later, this was completely shattered and the romantic myth of war was lost forever. Orders were issued almost immediately for the battalion to move up to the front line. Many of the men were not aware they were to assault Hill 60 until just before 5 a.m. on the morning of 22nd of August 1915. Hill 60 was considered of strategic importance for two reasons. First of all, it overlooked much of the Anzacs positions, and second of all, whoever controlled it also controlled two wells that supplied water. Sidney Goodsell led his company into murderous machine gun and rifle fire, and several men were killed. He managed to get a considerable number of his men into the first line of Turkish trenches before halting. If those still fit thought that was their first and last experience of total carnage, they were wrong. Just 5 days later, the battalion was ordered back into the line for a second attempt to remove the Turks from Hill 60. Chapman called for volunteers this time, and every fit and able man stepped forward. This time they were successful in securing a foothold on the hill, but many more men were killed. It was then, on the 22nd of October, Thomas, a part of the 5th Reinforcements, arrived on the shores of Gallipoli. Following the conquest of Hill 60, the battalion was placed in reserve behind the 5th Brigade's position between Walker's Ridge and Quinn's Post, where Thomas played a mainly defensive role. Their main area of responsibility during this time was Courtney's Post. The 18th Battalion remained in Gallipoli until the end of December 1915, before evacuating without casualties. The battalion was then transferred to Egypt for further training. 3 months after their return to Egypt, they were setting sail yet again, this time for the Western Front. Thomas and the 18th Battalion arrived in France on the 25th of March 1916, almost to full strength, taking part in their first major battle at Pozieres between the 25th of July and the 5th of August. Initially, the AIF was designated for patrolling and garrison duties, but during the night of the 25th and 26th of June 1916, the 5th Brigade, including Thomas and other members of the 18th Battalion, conducted their first trench raids, both of which were successful. The battalion returned to the Pozieres trenches for a second time in late August. After a spell in a quieter sector of the Belgian front, the 2nd Division, including the 5th Brigade, came south to the battlefield of the Somme in October. The 18th Battalion was spared from having to mount an attack across the quagmire that the Somme battlefield had become, but had to continue manning the trenches at the front through a very bleak winter. Due to the horrific conditions at the Somme, Thomas had contracted a condition known as trench foot. This was caused by the prolonged exposure to the damp, cold and sanitary condition in the trenches. Mud filled the trenches knee-deep, and with poor drainage, the soldiers had no way of keeping their feet dry. In mid-November of 1916, Thomas was admitted to the field hospital at the Somme, suffering from shell shock and trench feet. After a period of time in the field hospital, it was evident that Thomas's injuries were too severe and he had to be transferred to England for hospitalisation. My grandfather, Thomas's son, tells the story of how Thomas's feet were spared from amputation. Along the journey, Thomas crossed paths with a captured German doctor who was trying an experimental treatment for trench foot using massage. The doctor was able to perform this new technique and save Thomas's feet. Thomas recuperated in the Harefield House Hospital until mid-1917, making a full recovery from the trench foot and shell shock he acquired in the Somme. For the last 12 months of the war, Thomas had become attached to the No. 1 Australian Auxiliary Hospital in Harefield, formerly known as the Harefield House Hospital. Here he did duties helping the sick and injured. Thomas returned to Australia and was discharged from the army in March of 1919. My great-grandfather, Thomas Lyle Davis, was only one of 416,809 Australian men who enlisted to fight in World War I. He was one of the 166,000 who were either wounded, gassed or taken prisoner, and fortunate enough to not be one of the 59,357 who were killed in the front lines. These numbers are staggering considering the population of Australia at the time was only 5 million strong. This is less than the current population of Sydney. Thomas's battalion, the 18th, suffered 1,060 members killed and 2,453 wounded. I truly believe I cannot fully appreciate the horrific conditions and experiences that these men lived through, and how I would have coped as a 17-year-old with the extreme sacrifices that these people made.